Secretary, Mr. Heterachi, Secretary, Dr. Jasinga, Chairperson, Ms. Karmarli, friends from the EU, Jenny, Ms. Harshini, DG Planning, Director, Mr. Hupali, dear tourism activists, very good morning to all of you. Thanks for the lovely introduction. I'm sorry you had to suffer through my life story. But I'm really happy to be here. It's a great, fantastic way to kickstart the new year as we turn a new page for Sri Lankan tourism today. Especially nice to see people here face to face. It's good to see us together once in a while, but doing so safely. I've noted that tourists are slowly but surely trickling back into Sri Lanka, with some 90,000 tourists arriving in December alone, according to my statistics. If they're right, which by the way accounts for approximately 50% of tourist arrivals in 2021 as a whole. And in fact, I was one of the lucky ones myself. I went to the south, spent a little bit of time in Weligama. I consider myself, however, a domestic tourist. And I saw a landscape I hadn't seen for almost 2 years. There were many, many tourists, and that was extremely encouraging. So therefore, as tourism rebounds, it's a good time, and maybe a pressing and urgent time, to reinvigorate the reflections on the why, the what, and the how of creating a sustainable tourism trajectory, one with green development at its core. In this vein, an observation that the UN World Tourism Organization panel of experts have said, and they foresee, quote, an increasing demand for open air and nature-based tourism, domestic tourism, and what they call slow travel experiences, which focus on sustainability. And this travel focused on actively impacting social and environmental conditions of host countries positively. So not just taking when tourists go, but giving back at the same time from their experience. So what does this mean for Sri Lanka? It means that the guiding tourism frameworks on the one hand and the tourism services and products on the other must more explicitly than ever, in both the global setting and here in the country, account better for how tourism impacts the country's natural resources, assets, and ecosystems. Thankfully, Sri Lanka has a good foundation. So the job really here is to build on existing work on sustainable development and sustainable tourism, and ensure a fair distribution of the benefits. Tourism, in my view, must no longer be viewed as just a sector or an industry, let alone a standalone sector or industry. It's much more nuanced. It's balancing humans' interactions with cultures, between cultures, and with nature, which is why tourists tour to begin with, and will increasingly do so going forward. And so, you know, what's more, from a national development perspective, tourism is a human-driven, spiritual engine towards achieving the SDGs. That's the way I like to think of it. So not so much industry or sector, but something more. And in this sense, it's not just ecotourism, it's not just careful conservation of assets, which Secretary Jasinga talked very eloquently to just now. It's those two, but what's more, it's that all tourism can lead to recreating the environment, leading to increases in species, reducing endangered species, for example, let's say in the Knuckles Range, leading to leading to reduction in polluted waters into pristine lakes and rivers, reduced fossil fuel consumption through renewable energies. Those all recreate the environment and the planet, which is very important at this time. So it's the SDGs linking economy, environment, and society. And rebuilding tourism can leverage the positive impacts on destinations and help build stronger communities through such means. It's nice to observe that the Ministry of Tourism and stakeholders have assumed the narrative along these lines so far. And UNDP has been really pleased to be a long-term partner in this endeavor. We really value the efforts of the ministry and especially the leadership of Secretary Hetirachi for more recently convening all tourism stakeholders to draft the national tourism policy, paving the way to proceed in a right direction, not haphazardly, but with larger and greater ambitions in mind. Assisting this, UNDP is really quite thankful for, and we deeply value the strategic engagement with the European Union, which helped lay a strong foundation to this policy. We had a small but catalytic project, EU and UNDP, that was launched for transforming tourism in Sri Lanka and for a stronger, resurgent, and rebranded tourism sector. This led to a revival roadmap in the very earliest days after COVID hit. And this helped, I think, lay the foundations for the policy deliberations that have taken place over the last year plus. It highlighted really what I think is also crucial is the need to rebrand and reposition Sri Lanka as an unmissable signature experience, recognized for a particular niche, indigenous services rooted in nature, in wellness, in culture and adventure, and of course environmental environmental recreation. And building on these roadmap recommendations, we've been pleased to help the policy along. And for UNDP's part, some of you will know that we first supported the ministry on sustainable tourism through the certification program for accommodation providers. Environmentally sustainable accommodation. And I'm pleased that we've moved also with the ministry to sustainable destination certification. And we look forward to building on this further through some planned EU and UNDP engagement in Central Province. So we really appreciate that partnership with the EU. We do more together in all of our areas. We don't just work together in tourism. And we look forward to building on this going forward. Just a couple of points more. One, as the policy will guide the trajectory of tourism in Sri Lanka for the next decades. And it will also provide the direction for the Tourism Strategic Plan and updating of Tourism Act and if that goes forward in its way. So the policy itself, coming back to sustainability, must set goals to ensure that tourism products protect the assets it depends on. Previously, as I understand, in the country, a key barrier in tourism may have been the somewhat inconsistent involvement, maybe limited engagement of stakeholders and partners to such conversations. And so besides environmental sustainability, I think sustainability needs to focus on the institutions and people. And I'm really pleased to note that the process has, in many ways, remedied this shortcoming and set the tone for future tourism relate to decision-making and planning, which is highly inclusive. And today's meeting, I believe, is attestation of that. And I congratulate the ministry, the wide team, for facilitating what looks to be like a rather exhaustive consultative process, engaging all the relevant stakeholders, including the provincial councils and local governments, tourism adjacent and leadership associations like SLITO and TAZO, and many private sector actors to obtain inputs to the policy. The public call for comments on the draft and today's validation workshop are just really critical components of this stakeholder inclusivity. And I also, from UNDP side, want to thank all of those persons, all of you here, for engaging in this exercise today. So it is today that there's a kind of open door for more consultation, and this is good. So what next? Subject to validation and feedback, and I already hear so much alignment in the narrative, as also articulated by our two secretaries here, and subject to cabinet endorsement. The next step would be implementation and oversight of that implementation from the government's perspective. So a proper plan with proper actions. The policy really needs to be translated into action. It needs to seamlessly flow into strategic plans, not just of the tourism ministry, but across ministries. And most importantly, it needs to flow into the business models and business plans of the myriad private sector actors and workers and individuals. It has to be owned by everybody in the country. We look forward to a continued engagement on that with the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Environment, SLTDA, the EU, and others like the World Bank, and so many other partners. And just to note that the private sector is not just a major stakeholder, but it's an investor and risk taker, and leveraging the private sector for sustainability, not just for tourists, but for sustainable tourism engagement, will be critical to trigger the goals we want to achieve. So it's important to remember in this sense that our efforts don't stop today, and I would like to recommit UNDP's continued support to what I would call this multi-stakeholder platform to bring stakeholders together, ensure that voices are represented in the tourism work of the country. Once again, thank you, Secretary Hetirachi, for your leadership and direction, and Ms. Kamali Fernando, the Interministerial Committee, the Tourism Advisory Council for their support to the policy formulation and validation process, and also for the excellent coordination extended by so many, the additional secretaries, DG Planning, Ms. Vitanage, and the Tourism Working Group team. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wish you a very wonderful and successful workshop. Thank you.